Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Pei, Bava Metzia 80, and so we're going to start on Pei Amid Aleph at the top of the page. Hold on one second. Okay. So it says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Socher es hapara, one who rents a cow, lachrosh bahar, and he rents the cow with the intent of plowing in the mountain. The charash babika, and instead he plows in the valley. A mountain is generally speaking more difficult to plow in than a valley. Im nishbara kankan, if the blade of the plow broke, potter, he's going to be exempt because if it breaks in a valley, it for sure would have broken if it was in the mountain. So he's okay. Babika, but let's say he rented it to plow in the valley. The charash bahar, and instead he plowed in the mountain. Im nishbara kankan, if the blade broke. Under those circumstances, he's going to be chayiv. He's going to be liable for the breaking of the plow because he only had permission to plow in the valley, not in the mountain. Let's say he rents the plow douche bakitnios in order to do the threshing of the legumes. Vidash betula, and instead he rents a cow to. Instead he uses it for the grain instead. So under those circumstances, we're going to say potter because he's exempt because the grain is not as dangerous as the kidneys. The kidneys are slipperier than the grain. But let's say he does a ladush betula, he rents the cow to thresh with the grain. And instead dash bekinios, and instead he threshes with the legumes, then he's chayev. Then he's going to be responsible nesha kinios mechalekes because the legumes are slipperier. And so therefore, since they're more slippery than the grain, he should have gotten explicit permission, and so therefore he's responsible. So the Gemara asked the question, going back to the case of the plowing of the field with the cow, let's say he didn't. Let's say the renter of the cow did not deviate from the precise instructions of the let's say the renter of the cow did not deviate from the precise instructions of the owner, and yet the blade still broke. Man Mashalim, who is going to be the one who's responsible to pay? There are two people who are working for the owner. There is the one whose job it is to hold the piece that's like the reins that would guide the person, and the other one whose job it is to move the blade, to insert the blade into the ground. So says our Papa did not Amar Papa did not get parasha mishalim, that the one who holds Rashi says this is the mardeya, which is like the whip, he's the one who pays, because since he didn't guide the plow directly, it's his fault that it went into the rocky area. Ravidi says the nakit mana, the one who's holding the blade, he's the one who's going to pay. The nakit mana mishalim, the one who's holding the blade is the one who has to pay. And so therefore that's going to be the one to pay, because he's the one who put it in the ground, and he put the blade into the ground too much, and so therefore it broke. The hilchasa, and the law is the nakim mana mashalim, and the law is that the one who's holding the blade is the one who pays. The duchta de mechaska gundari, and if it's a place that's very, very rocky, and so therefore it's known to them that there's a lot of rough terrain there, and they both have to be very careful. Then travail mishalman. Then both of them have to pay, because they should have been very careful, and they knew that even on any small thing it would break. So now the Gemara says, "I'm Rabbi Yochanan, I'm mocher paro lechaver." Let's say somebody sells a cow to his friend. But Amrlo, and he says to him, when the guy sells the cow to his friend, he says, "Be careful, parazu niklanis, this cow is a goring cow, or a nashchanis, or it's a biting cow, or a batanasi, or it's a kicking cow, or aftanasi, it's a cow that just lies down and damages that way. V'hayaba mum echad usinafo bein amumin," and that is one of these defects, but he's like hiding it amongst the other blemishes. He's burying it amongst the as like a needle in the haystack. Then we say that the purchaser shouldn't have been expected to be aware which one was the real defect, and so therefore is going to be viewed as a mistaken sale. Tanya Nami Hachi. But let's say he says mum zeh umum acher. Let's say he specifies he has this blemish, and he also has another blemish, but he doesn't say. He specifies the blemish that it has. Ein zeh mekachtos. Well, then that's not going to be considered a mekachtos because we're going to say under those circumstances he was specific about the blemish that he had. And indeed, Tanya Nami Achi, we have a brisa that supports this because what does the brisa say? The brisa says, somebody sells a shifra to his friend in the Amrullo, and he says to him, Shifra zu shotehi, nichbesi, mishu mmsi. This shifra is shota, she's insane. She's nichbes. Nichbes was epilepsy, but they used to think it was a mental illness. Or she was mishu amemesi, or she was like insane. The haya ba mum echad, and she had one of those blemishes, one of those defects, usinafo ben amumin, and he basically like buried it amongst the other defects. That's a mistaken transaction and it's voided. But if he says mum zeh umamacher, if he says she has this one and other blemishes, ein zeh mekachtos, then we're going to say it's not a mekachtos because there he was specific about the one that she had. Let's say the person has actually all, or the animal has all of these blemishes that he specified. So would we say that indeed it's not a mekachtos? If he has all of these blemishes, it's not a mekachtos. If he has all of these blemishes, it's not a mistake. Because then you could see he wasn't trying to bury it. So that's going to be the case there. So the Gemara says the Mishnah, Socher Esach. This Mishnah is a highly technical Mishnah, so we just do the best we can. It's highly technical. Socher Esach. Somebody rents the donkey, and he wants to bring wheat on the donkey, and instead he brings the barley on the donkey. Now, barley, generally speaking, lighter than wheat. So he brought barley instead of the wheat. Rashi says the barley is lighter. Then we're going to say, Chayav, that under those circumstances, he is responsible. The renter is responsible. If the donkey collapsed because there was too much weight, why is he responsible? Because he added on 3 kabin, and we don't say since the barley. Rashi's saying we don't say since the barley is lighter than the wheat that he could really have added on in the barley until he reached the same level of the wheat. We don't say that because we're going to see why, but because the reality is that in order to add on to the barley, you're going to be adding on in the volume. And so therefore the problem is that the volume is going to be more difficult for the donkey to carry it. Meaning to say, Rashi says when the donkey is carrying the wheat, it can typically carry up to what's called a lesech. A lesech. That's approximately a half a core or 15 saw. So basically, let's say he put a lesech of barley on the donkey, which is actually lighter, which is a lesech of barley, so that's equivalent to wheat. But in order to do that, there's 3 more calves because there's more volume. So therefore, you should. What Rashi's saying is, shouldn't think that just because he has the same amount of weight, he's okay, because the problem is the volume. Okay, so then the Mishnah continues. Same thing with, he thought he put straw, but instead he's putting crops, but instead he put on straw. So if he thought he was putting crops on it, but instead he put on straw, we're going to say under those circumstances he's going to be responsible for the same concept. Because the volume is going to be as difficult like a load, like a burden. Let's say he says, Lahavi lesechitin. Let's say he rented the animal in order to bring a lesech of wheat, vehevi lesech saorin, and instead he brought the lesech of barley, potter. Under those circumstances, he's not going to be responsible. V'imosif almaso, but if he added on to its burden, chayiv, he's going to be responsible. Because the reason is that the lesech of barley is equivalent to the lesech of wheat. The kami osif almasa ovi. How much will, if he adds on to the initial burden, will he be chayiv for? So Sumcha says, Mishum Rabbi Meir, a seah for a camel, or shlosha kabin l'chamor, or 3 kabin for a donkey. If you add on a seah for a camel, or 3 kabin for a donkey, that's going to be the equivalent of adding too much, and then you're going to be responsible. So first of all, the Gemara is going to try to explain this Mishnah. Idmar, Abaye Amar, Abaye says that when the Mishnah says that the barley is kasha kamasoi, that when we said in the barley, that we said in the Mishnah, nesha nefech kasha kamasoi, then what is he saying here? So Abaye says kasha kamasoi tonight. That the way we're supposed to read it is that it is that if you switch it and you're carrying the barley, it's going to be kasha kamaso, hard like a burden. And Rava says kasha limasoi tonight. And Rava says it is hard to carry. So it's either hard like a burden or it's hard to carry. And what Abaye Amar kasha kamaso tonight, Abaye says it's hard. Abaye says we're going to say that what it is hard like a burden. What is he saying when he says that? So he says nifla kitak ki pikla. So he's basically saying is that the volume is like weight. The mosif shlosha kavin. So if you add on 3 kavin of volume, then what's actually happening is he's adding that amount of weight, and so therefore he's chayav, and so therefore it's too much. Whereas Rava says kasha l'masoitanan, it's difficult to carry because what he's basically saying is tikla ki tikla v'nifla have tosefes. The weight is equivalent to the weight, and the nifla and the volume is an addition to it. So basically, so the Gemara says, let's look at what Rashi says there. Tikla katikla. Eno chayav. He's not going to be liable. Ad she eno chayav. Ad she yishve koved asaorim koved achitin. Until the weight of the barley equals the weight of the wheat. That this volume then becomes an addition. But if it's the same equivalent volume and it's less weight, and then we wouldn't say nefach hashava harei kamishkal, that the equivalent volume is like the weight and will be liable in that case. So that's why it's saying kasha lamasoy v'lo kasha kamasoy. So Rava is arguing, and he's more lenient than Abaye. So the Gemara says, let's argue with what Rava says. Tana, because we learned in our Mishnah, Wahavi lesech chitin ve'hevi lesech saorin potter im hosef amaso chayiv. So it says if he contracts to bring lesech of wheat and instead he brings a lesech of barley, he's not chayiv. But if he adds on to the burden, he is going to be liable. What doesn't this mean? My lav shloshes kavin. Doesn't this mean where if he adds on 3 kavin of barley, he is going to be chayiv, just like Abaye said? The Gemara says no. It means is if he added a sa, he's going to be liable. meaning say he adds on to the barley. Gemara says, but didn't we say about this? V'kama Yosef amasa o v'yachayev. Don't we say about this? How much can he add on to the burden and he'll be responsible? And Sumcha says, Mishum Meir se'al gamal shlosha kavim l'chamor. And it's a se'ah for a camel and 3 kavim for a donkey. So it's Mishnah telling us explicitly that even if he adds 3 kavim to a donkey, he's going to be chayev, and he doesn't need to do a saw, like Rabbi was saying. So hachikamar. So this is what the Mishnah means. Shani chitin vehevi chitin, where he said explicitly you can bring wheat, and he brought wheat, or soren vehevi soren. Kamal Yosef al masovi chayev. So where you don't change anything, how much do you add on your chayev? Sumcha says Mishimra Meir seil gamal shosha kamal chamor. So a seah for a camel and 3 kavim for a donkey. But where but in the middle case, where he said bring wheat and instead he brought barley, then he has to add on a seah in order to be chayiv under those circumstances. So basically, according to Rava, the Mishnah is giving us 3 separate teachings. Basically, the first section of the Mishnah is telling us where the weight of the actual burden is the same of what he had said of the initial weight that they had contracted on, and so therefore, when you inflate it by the volume, that's the extra, and so then you're going to be chayav. In the middle case, the volume, which is the actual load, which is the lesech of barley, is equal to the lesech of wheat, but the barley is less, and so therefore you pay less. Therefore, you're potter. But in the last section, it's talking about a case where he loaded the same amount of grain, but he added on more than a lesech, and in that case, he's going to be chayiv because he went above the weight. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, well, Tashma, we have a different problem. So we have a brisa which says if he contracted to bring a lesech of wheat, vehevi, and instead, what does he bring? He brings sheish esrei sa'orim, and instead of bringing a lesech of wheat, he brought 16 barley. So we went on 1 extra seah of barley. Chayev, he's going to be responsible. Hashloshas kavin potter, but that wouldn't imply if he brought 3 kavin, he would be exempt. So the Gemara says, Abai says, no, we're talking about there's different ways of analyzing these measurements. There's a heaping, and there's a excessive heaping and a regular measurement. And so therefore, it's really the same measurements. It's really only 3 kavin that it was extra, and that's why it's potter. It depends how you measure the seah there. So Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan. So now we're saying what's an extra burden? Kav l'kateif. A kav is if you add on a kav to what a kateif is a porter or someone who's carrying something on his shoulder, and then you're going to be responsible. Adriv la'ariva, and adriv is the extra amount that you're chayav for, that you're liable for on a small boat, and kor l'sfina, and a kor is an extra amount for a ship. Shloshes korim with bornei gedola, and 3 kor for a very large ship. Amar kav l'kateif, and kav is an extra amount for a kateif, the porter, that you're going to be liable. So the Gemara says, well, Misa de lo matzibe, but if he really can't carry this, bardasu, he's a person. You shouldn't be chayav for his injuries because porter is somebody who has knowledge. So let him not carry it. Gemara says, Amar Abaye b'shechavto altar. Immediately the injury happened. Rabbi says, altar. No, even if he didn't knock it down immediately, we're talking about a case where the porter thought well, basically we're saying that if he carries extra, you have to pay him more. And Rav Ashi Amar maybe he didn't realize why he was weak. He didn't realize it was because it was too big. He thought maybe he's just having a bad day. He didn't realize that the thing was way too heavy for him. An extra core is a problem for a ship, and 3 korim for a very large ship. Amar Papa Shmamina Stam Sfinos Bas Tlasin Korim. We see from here that typical boats, Stam Sfinos, they could carry 30 korim and go in the water. Because we said 1/30th over it is where it's a problem. So therefore, it's a core for a ship. If you just buy a ship, we need to know what the actual amount that you're buying is. So now On to the next Mishnah, Kol Almani and Shomer Sachar Hain, all the craftsmen who work are going to be considered like they're Shomer Sachar, like they are uh, paid Shomer. So we know that there are four types of Shomer. There's a Shomer Chinam, an unpaid watchman, a Shol, a borrower, and then we're going to have a uh, a shomer sachar, one who is paid, and a socher, and a renter. So a craftsman, a person is working on something, basically he's like a contractor, so he's going to be considered like he's a shomer sachar. The kuan sha'amru tol es shelcha, and about all of these people, they say to him, once the craftsmen say, take your property and bring me the money, well, now he's no longer working for him. Now he's watching it for him, and he's watching him for free. Then he's a shomer chinam. Then he's an unpaid. Shemorli veshmorcha. Let's say he says, you watch my property and I'll watch yours. Then we're going to say in both cases, shomer sachar. He's a paid watchman because he's getting a benefit from it. Let's say he says, Shemorli, let's say he says, can you watch it for me? He says, just put it down in front of me. Well, then he's a shomer chinam. Then the person who says, just put it down, he's an unpaid watchman under those circumstances. Let's say he lends him money on a mashkon. He lends money to some. Reuben lends money to Shimon. Shimon gives him a collateral, gives him his watch. Shomer Sachar. So then he's a paid watchman, and Gemara is going to have to explain why. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shomer Chinam. He says he's an unpaid watchman. We'll see why. Haveo Peros. Let's say he lent him produce, then Shomer Sachar. Then he's a paid watchman. Since the Peros is going to rot, so therefore, when a person pays him money, he's going to get the fresh produce. So therefore, he's a paid watchman because he's watching the other person's security. Abba Shaul says, a person who lent money to somebody who's poor, he's allowed to rent out the poor person's mashkon in order to charge people and use that to lower the loan. Because basically he's returning a lost object to this person because the person, he's helping him make money. Let's say that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir, because what does Rabbi Meir say? The Tanya Sochar Ketzim Mishalim. Rabbi Meir says B'Shomer Chinam. Rabbi Meir says that the Sochar, the paid worker, is like an unpaid watchman. And Rabbi Yehuda says Kishomer Sochar is like a paid watchman. So it must be that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says that a renter is like a shomer chinam, and let's assume that the craftsman, the uman, is just like the renter. Why are we assuming? Because neither of them is paid directly for watching what's under their watch, and so therefore, but they both get some benefit. The renter in that he can use it, and the uman is that he's paid for when he finishes. So the Gemara says, no, Philotema Rabbi Meir, but you could say that Rabbi Meir is saying that the Kashava Koyama that the owner, with that our Mishnah is agreeing even with Rabbi Meir, in the sense that Rabbi Meir says it's Shomer Chinam, but why? Rabbi Meir would agree, because for that benefit, Kashava Koyama that the owner leaves everybody else and he hires him, just the value that he's hired him, he's going to be considered like a shomer sachar. Gemara says, well, if that's the case, shomer sachar nami. Well, if that's the case, he should also be a shomer sachar. So the Gemara says, no, why would the renter be a shomer sachar? For the benefit, because that he's allowing the renter to rent the property. So he's like a shomer sachar. Somewhere says, okay, you're right. Rabbi Meir. So you could say that our Mishnah is even agreeing with Rabbi Meir, but the porta, meaning to say for the benefit that he pays the craftsman a little bit more, he's like a shomer sachar. Sochar nami, the renter also. Isn't the renter getting a good deal? He's paying a little less. Rabbi Meir. You could even say it's Rabbi Meir, but yeah, no, the toughest leia agre. It's Rabbi Meir. You can even say it's Rabbi Meir. Why? But here, no, that benefit to toughest agre that basically he's holding it back until he gets his benefit. To low buy a male mepek azuze, so he doesn't have to go out and look for his money. Shomer sacher. He's basically considered like a shomer sacher. You buy the same, if you want, you could say the following. If you want, you could say the following. Kedemacha for Rabbi Bar Avua Vitani, like Rabbi Bar Avua switch it. He says, Sochar Ketim Mishalim. How does the renter pay? Rabbi Meir says, Kishomer Sachar. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kishomer Shomer Chinam. That you could say that Rabbi Meir says he's like a Shomer Sachar, and Rabbi Yehuda says he's like a Shomer Chinam. So according to this approach, Rabbi Meir is saying that the renter is like a Shomer Sachar. And so therefore, Rabbi Meir is basically consistent with our Mishnah. But once he says, take your money, take what's yours and bring me the money eventually, he's like a shomer chinam. Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah, Amaro shoal shlach, if the borrower said, send the animal to me, usholacho mesachayev, and he sent it, then the borrower is chayev. Even also when he returns it, if the lender says to return it, then once you say it, he's not chayev. Amar from Bar Papa Amar Chlista. That's only if it's during the time of but we're going to have to pick this up. God willing, this will be Daf Yomi for Sunday. We'll pick it up then, and we will have an amazing Shabbos. Everybody should have a Geshmak Shabbos.